Okay, excellent. Okay, so without further ado, let me just disable this function. Okay. Okay, so sorry about that, everybody. So the first incentive program we're going to start with is actually a probably the one of the best incentive programs that FDA has established so far. It's actually almost a brand new program. It's called the Commissioner's National Priority Voucher, the CNPV pilot program. And actually, after the first time I ever spoke to One Nucleus, I think the day after, the commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Macri, had announced this program. And it's a very exciting program. So it was announced just in June 2025. And the program is really designed to expedite review timelines, if you can believe it, down to 1 to 2 months. Okay. Now, for everybody that knows how FDA works, it can take, at least a year to hear back from FDA with an acceptance or a rejection. So 1 to 2 months is really unbelievable. The program is only for drugs and biologics. So if you're a device or you're a combination drug and device, you're not eligible for the program. Not only does it truncate the review timeline, but it also provides sponsors with really like hand in glove opportunities to deal with FDA, what FDA calls them intensive real time communications. So that's really helpful. And what you do is FDA, if you get awarded as a recipient in this program, you actually get a voucher. And the vouchers are awarded to companies whose innovations and the way they are bringing those innovations or intend to bring them to the marketplace, if they align with the commissioner's national priorities. And that's an important concept, and that's a new concept in the world of FDA, actually. And these priorities are the following. Either you would address a U.S. public health crisis, you are capable of delivering more innovative cures with transformative potential to the US. You address, by the way, these are not conjunctive, these are disjunctive. So you don't have to meet them all, but you've got to meet one of them. The more, the better, obviously. You address a large unmet medical need. You also onshore, and this is a very important concept that I'm sure everybody has been hearing a lot about. You are onshoring drug development and manufacturing so we can strengthen the supply chain. In the last probably 2 decades or so, FDA and spoken a lot about the life sciences offshoring that has happened. And so now the big focus is to bring back the life sciences industry to the United States. Or you increase the affordability, including a commitment that you will, or your product will help lower U.S. drug prices. So that's the eligibility focus. As I noted, it is only for prescription drugs and biologics. So that's going to be NDAs and BLAs. No devices, no combination drug device products. Importantly, if you are a recipient of one of these vouchers, if you're lucky enough to get one, these vouchers, unlike some of FDA's other voucher programs, these are not transferable. So they are awarded to a company and basically they stay with that company. They expire 2 years after issuance. They cannot be they cannot be bought or sold. This 2025, this was our pilot year for this program. And FDA, which we're going to talk about, actually just issued a list of award recipients. So it's really exciting. They are or at least they've indicated that there are going to be other recipients that will, receive the awards. They're doing it on a rolling basis. The way it works in terms of the mechanics for the application is a company needs to submit a well-crafted statement of interest, less than 350 words, so much easier than a college application, I might tell you. Um, of course, in some ways, it's almost harder to do something with fewer words. And basically, in your statement of interest, you have to, create a very good narrative as to how your innovation dovetails with our national priorities. And that gets submitted. In terms of the sponsor responsibilities and readiness, the way it's working is that all the applications get reviewed, and FDA has, depending on what kind of product it is, FDA will have different divisions review the different applications. They're looking for what they call submission excellence. So high quality applications, robust clinical, non-clinical, chemistry, manufacturing controls data. And, sponsors are asked questions. They're not given a lot of time to prepare. There's ad hoc meetings. And FDA will, is reviewing these applications promptly. In terms of the strategic context and the differentiators, the distinction from other priority review vouchers is that these things cannot be monetized. Okay. So other priority review vouchers, some companies like to get them because they can turn around and sell them. And they typically have a very high value. So you'll see that in, some of the deals we've worked on, these things are bought and sold. The CNPV vouchers cannot be monetized. The way this program was created is that the incentive is really about companies that want to really get something to the marketplace. So the incentive is the speed with which FDA will, review your application, enhanced engagements with FDA. So there is one note is that some companies, although lots of companies are very excited about this program, some companies are a little concerned that this could somehow adversely impact the rare disease community, because that's another program that FDA has. And if FDA is now having its various review divisions review, numerous applications for this program, that means there may be fewer, reviewers to review applications for, like, let's say, orphan drug designations. Very exciting. Just last week on the 16th, FDA announced that it had awarded the first 9 voucher recipients under this program. And this is very interesting because if you take a look at this list, you'll see why this is such an interesting program. These awards really, kind of span the gamut of different kinds of products that truly address different kinds of needs here in the United States. Obviously, we have, a drug for infertility, diabetes, which is a national health crisis, vaping addiction. Actually, I can't disclose, but we are representing one of the companies that received one of these awards, so we're particularly thrilled. A biologic for deafness, one for blindness, something for pancreatic cancer. Interestingly, the 2 at the bottom, one for augmentin and one for ketamine, those are for onshoring domestic manufacturing. So this way, particularly with respect to antibiotics, where we did have a shortage during COVID because so many things had been, offshored. So these are 2 just because they're going to be manufactured here in the United States. Um, And each one of these products kind of addresses something different in terms of what has been identified by FDA and the president as a national priority. Um, the president, of course, is thrilled that we have a infertility product that received the award because that has become a very important issue for his administration. Wants to see an increase in the birth rate and wants to improve access to fertility care and expand access to IVF. Um, One of the things that's interesting is FDA, according to Dr. Marty Macri, is once the applications were assembled, FDA convened what they call something like a one-day tumor board style meeting where they went through everything and they made their selections. Um, and so they worked pretty quickly, given the fact, when you think about it, that this program was only announced in June 2025, and FDA already made 9 awards just last week. So that's almost unheard of in terms of speed for the agency. Oh, one other thing that's important is that each drug review division will also have the ability to even nominate a product that they believe meets the national priority goals. So it's not just that sponsors are going to apply. FDA can also, nominate a particular innovation. So that's different too. Um, this just really what's interesting is that this slide really talks about what was behind FDA's and the administration's selection for the infertility drug, and they really are looking to create much more competition in this space to bring down healthcare costs, which is something that FDA historically has not done. They really did not get involved in drug pricing matters, but as we know, that's changing. So that was the impetus behind this particular award. This is just more on the drug for those who want to read about it. Now, you might be wondering, well, that's great. That's great if you're a drug or you're a biologic, but what if I'm a device? What is there for me? So let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite programs, not as new, but still a very active program, and lots of our clients have availed themselves of this particular designation. It's called the Breakthrough Device Designation, BDD, and it's a voluntary program, and the purpose is to expedite the development, assessment, and review of medical devices and device-led combination products. And that's very important because if you're a drug device combo, it really depends on whether you're device-led or drug-led. So if you're device-led, you would stay in the BDD designation program. And the purpose is to bring about more effective treatments or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. Who is eligible for this particular program? It would be any device or device-led combination product that's pursuing either, pre-market approval application, a 510(k), or a de novo pathway. Importantly, software would qualify as well under this program. What are the designation criteria? Well, the first criterion is that the device provides more effective treatment or diagnosis of a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease or condition. Along those lines, FDA may consider whether technologies or particular device features could reduce health and healthcare disparities, improve accessibility, or address unmet needs in certain disadvantaged populations. The second criterion is that the innovation meets at least one of the following. So that's important. You have to meet one of the following, but you do have to meet both criteria, but one of the following in the second, that your innovation represents breakthrough technology. No approved cleared alternatives exist. The innovation offers significant advantages over existing approved or cleared alternatives, and the device availability is in the best interest of patients. You also have to demonstrate to FDA in your application that there is a reasonable expectation of technical and clinical success. A complete clinical data package is not required at designation. So FDA, I will say, after having worked on several of these designation requests, unlike the CNPV application request that has to be less than 350 words, these are very intensive and extensive application requests. So it's the exact opposite. And if FDA does not believe that ultimately your innovation is going to actually get approval. So, the term that I had just mentioned, which is the reasonable expectation of technical and clinical success, can also be interpreted a reasonable expectation that it will ultimately get, cleared or approved by FDA. If the review team does not believe that it will, they will not grant this particular designation. So, what are the program features and benefits? Well, you obtain a priority review of your particular submission. You get interactive and timely communications with FDA, including sprint discussions, which is great. That means you're getting FDA's feedback quickly, perhaps not as fast as if you were able to avail yourself of the CNPV program. FDA will go through with you very closely, all of your data collection, development plans, your clinical protocol agreements. And so that's really helpful. Also, you get senior management engagement and review team support. So you don't get bogged down in, waiting too long for FDA to get back to you. You really do get you really do get that management engagement. FDA is committed to providing flexible and efficient clinical study designs, and the potential for a balanced data collection approach when appropriate. And you get an expedited inspection of your manufacturing site and quality systems for your PMAs. In terms of the process and timelines, a sponsor would submit a standalone breakthrough device designation request via the Q-Sub process. There is no fee, at least at this time, for the designation request. And FDA generally requests needed additional information by day 30. And they're pretty good about that, but expect them to ask for more information on day 30. And they are committed to issuing either an acceptance, a grant, or a denial decision within 60 calendar days of receipt. In terms of the submission content for your BDD request, you're going to be submitting a cover letter identifying that this is a BDD request, a description of the device, indications, intended use, the regulatory history for the innovation and the proposed marketing pathway with a rationale, And then this is really the crux of it, which is the last bullet. It's the justification that the device meets the statutory criteria and supported by available data. And as I said, these are typically long and extensive applications. Importantly, the program does not lower, and this is, FDA really stresses this, any sort of statutory standards for safety and efficacy, and nor does it change the formal review clocks for marketing submissions. The designation does not guarantee that you're actually going to get either an approval, any sort of pre-market authorization either. It is very helpful, and there is a correlation, but it is not a guarantee. To give you an idea of program metrics, as of June this year, FDA reported that it has received approximately 1,176 designations and 160 marketing authorizations under the program. So that's quite a bit. And this is a breakdown kind of so you can see, what's been granted in what year. So the program, there was a precursor program, actually. FDA changed the name. This used to be called Expedited Access Pathway, which started around 2015. So you can see how the program has really grown. In 2021, we had a lot of designations that were granted. That was a COVID year, and so you could see that spike, which really started in 2020. But then it started to taper off after 2022. I'm surprised 2024 we had quite a bit as well. But companies are still routinely trying to avail themselves of this program. What's interesting is that what I have observed in my practice is that a lot of startups, obviously device startups, this is a great program if they can meet the statutory criteria, because even if they do not have, let's say, the funds to actually ultimately obtain the pre-market authorization, once you receive this designation, there's so much cachet that this confers onto your company and your product that it's, a lot of companies, once they receive the designation, they'll either, there's some sort of exit, a flip, something like that, because I think it's a fabulous way to monetize a particular innovation. So that's why we see a lot of activity in the startup space in this program. So this will give you an idea about the types of BDDs that have been granted by the clinical panel. And so you would kind of expect this, although quite frankly, I thought that there would have been more in the radiology area. But cardiovascular is leading quite a bit, 200, almost 250 awards. And so if you happen to have an innovation that falls into one of these categories, particularly, one of the first five, it's a great idea to look closely to see whether you can characterize your innovation as meeting the statutory criteria. Now, similar to the BDD program, we have the BTD program, and this is for drugs and biologics. This is the Breakthrough Therapy Designation program. Now, this program still exists. It's a great program. Of course, it might ultimately be superseded as a matter of practical reality by the new voucher program. Well, but FDA, this is still very much in existence. So what companies do, just so you understand is many times they will apply for as many kind of incentive programs as possible. And, you'll often see particular innovations get more than one. And so that's great. So you're not limited to just applying to one. So the BTD program is designed to expedite the development and review of drugs and biologics, so not devices, for serious conditions where preliminary clinical evidence indicates the potential for substantial improvement over available therapy on clinically significant endpoints. What are the eligibility criteria? Well, the drug or biologic has to be intended to treat a serious or life-threatening condition. And the preliminary clinical evidence has to indicate that the drug may in fact do that. It will have substantial improvement over available therapy on one or more clinically significant endpoints, typically those affecting irreversible death or serious disease symptoms. In terms of the key benefits of the designation, all fast-track features, including more frequent FDA sponsor interactions, both in terms of actual meetings and written communications, would be available to the sponsor. FDA will allow a rolling review of your completed sections for either your NDA or your BLA. And you're still eligible for accelerated approval and priority review if certain criteria are met. FDA is committed to providing intensive, early, and iterative FDA guidance on the development of your particular drug or biologic, beginning potentially at least in phase 1. And like the BDD program, the interaction would be with senior managers and cross-disciplinary teams. So you're not dealing with, lower level review people who sometimes might be mired down in some of the more bureaucratic issues. So in terms of timing and process, FDA encourages submission requests before you initiate pivotal trials, and ideally by the end of phase 2. So this way you can realize the full benefits of the program. Because remember, one of the big draws for this program is the ability to get a lot of input from FDA. So there's no sense in applying, later on, because then you're going to be missing out on a lot of the input that FDA would be providing to you. Requests are submitted to the active IND, and FDA responds within 60 days with either a grant or a denial. If a sponsor has not made a request, FDA may suggest the sponsor consider requesting the BTD. And the designation could get rescinded if it turns out subsequent data does not support the eligibility criteria. So for instance, if a phase 3 trial fails to demonstrate a substantial improvement over existing therapies, you could get your designation rescinded. In terms of the interplay with some of the other expedited programs, the breakthrough therapy designation can be combined with fast track, accelerated approval, and priority review. As you know, the BTD itself is not an approval, obviously, it's just an award, a designation. Also, which carries a tremendous amount of marketing cachet. So we see that as well. This is a very popular program for our, some of the younger, startups in the biologic and in the drug space. In terms of the practical implications for development, there's early iterative FDA advice, which can tremendously help streamline things like your endpoint strategy, chemistry, manufacturing controls planning, study design. Um, FDA will try to find kind of a least burdensome means approach, which is very, very helpful. In terms of the program metrics and impact, as of June 2024, there have been about 1,500 requests with about almost 600 designations granted. Um, and ultimately, of those 600 designations that were granted, there were about 300 approvals of the products. Um, but importantly, there was about a 30% reduction in time in terms of the review. This is a new program, just announced actually, and in August 2025. This is called FDA's Pre-Check Program. It makes you think about what you get when you wait in line and to go through any sort of TSA, but this is having to do with manufacturing sites. Very, very exciting program. And FDA has just recently shared a draft framework for the program and held a public meeting where they are soliciting public feedback. And the purpose of this particular program, incentive program, is to encourage onshoring. So it's, to strengthen the US pharmaceutical supply chain by increasing regulatory predictability and facilitating the construction of manufacturing sites in the US. So that's really, the onshoring process. Um, and this program was developed in response to an executive order that I think in one of our previous webinars with One Nucleus we addressed. This was a very important concept for the president, and FDA is executing on it. And this program is all about getting companies to construct manufacturing sites here in the United States, both for active pharmaceutical ingredients and finished drug products. The strategic context is really that over half of US distributed drugs are currently made overseas, and only a small share of active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturers for FDA-approved products are US based. So this program the intent is to drastically change that metric. The program design is really based on a two-phase model, which is focused on manufacturing facility build out and faster chemistry manufacturing controls assessments for marketing applications. So phase one is the actual facility readiness. And like we've seen with some of the other incentive programs, this is going to provide you with, earlier and more frequent FDA engagement in terms of your facility design, pre-production milestones, construction, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to encourage a facility-specific Type 5 drug master file, addressing layouts, quality systems, management practices, et cetera. And then phase two of the program relates to the actual application submission. And that would be a streamlined development of the CMC sections of your marketing application through the pre-application meetings and get you early feedback. Front-loaded quality element assessments, which will help expedite the reviews and ultimately your final inspection. Just at the end of September, on September 30th, FDA held a public meeting about the pre-check program. The agency did present a draft framework and got some feedback. And there's still no draft guidance yet but I expect that to be coming pretty soon. So if this is something that is of interest to your company, and I would say you definitely want to look into this program further. Of course, it would require you to manufacture your product here and not elsewhere, which is, a large financial undertaking. So it may not be available to many companies. A similar program is called the ANDA Prioritization Pilot Program. And this is all about promoting the availability, the greater availability of generic drug products. This was just announced at the beginning of this month. So you can see how much is happening. This is monumental for FDA, which historically moved at kind of a glacial pace. So this was just announced in the beginning of October of this year. It's a pilot program which will allow FDA to prioritize the review of generic drug submissions, provided that the drug product is manufactured in the United States. And this is all about strengthening, once again, the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain and incentivizing the onshoring of drug products. In this case, generic drug products. And that really goes to the administration's focus on making less expensive drugs more routinely available and more accessible. So the context and the rationale for this particular incentive and incentive pilot program is our government wants to reduce the reliance that exists and certainly has existed on foreign manufacturing and drug product and testing. They want to reduce the burden for overseas inspections because they're very expensive, obviously, for the agency, and they are complex. And having been involved with a number of them, I think if you just check, FDA's weekly import alerts, you see how often, particularly in the context of APIs, these, companies get added to the import list. So this will make things a lot easier for FDA. And of course, it will ultimately result in less expensive drug products. In terms of eligibility, and these are conjunctive, so you have to meet all three of these. Your bioequivalence testing has to be conducted here in the United States. You might qualify for a waiver, but in terms of the actual testing, it has to be done here. The actual generic drug has to be manufactured here in the United States. So your finished dosage form manufacturer has to be located here. And your API, your active pharmaceutical ingredient supplier, has to be located in the United States. So as you can see, this is quite a change from how generic drugs have historically been manufactured and where they've been manufactured, both in terms of the finished dosage form and the API. So what are the benefits? Well, you may be able to receive, if you qualify, you will receive priority review, and which means a shorter review time and hopefully a shorter time by which it will take for you to get to market. And to request consideration for this program, you would request priority review at the time of your ANDA submission. You would reference this program as the basis for the prioritization, and you would include supporting documentation that you meet the three criteria set forth above. This program only applies to generic drug products, so it's not going to apply to any sort of new chemical entities, any new drugs, or anything like that. What's the relationship of this program to other FDA initiatives? It complements FDA's other new program, the FDA PreCheck program, which will expedite the inspection and licensure of new U.S. manufacturing facilities. What would the expected impact of this program be? It would really be shorter review timelines, and closer relationship with FDA. And this is just some context about the program. What's interesting is that if you take a look at the second bullet, you can see as of 2025, only 9% of API manufacturers are located in the United States, as compared to 22% in China, India. So that's quite significant. And in terms of pivotal studies for drugs, including bioequivalence testing, they also historically have been mostly conducted outside the United States. So that's really the impetus for this program. And if you are a generic drug company, I would urge you to certainly consider this program. Okay, this is an oldie but a goodie, so to speak. This is Orphan Drug Designation, and I'm sure lots of you are aware of this program. This is probably FDA's oldest incentive program, but it's still popular and it's still a great program. This program actually dates back to, I think, 1983, and it was the result of a congressional act called the Orphan Drug Act, which was passed and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan. The purpose and the scope of this program, and this is much different than the other programs, is because this program is only for drugs and biologics that are intended to treat rare diseases and conditions here in the US. So as you can see, we can contrast this with the other programs that are really intended to have vast applicability. So the exact opposite of treating just a small select group. Those programs are intended for, drugs, devices, biologics that can really deal with large scale public health crises. So this is not that. This program is administered by FDA's Office of Orphan Products Development and only applies to drugs and biologics. So if you're a device, you cannot qualify. Importantly, in order to be eligible for this particular designation, the rare disease or condition that your drug must or biologic must treat has to affect fewer than 200,000 people here in the US. So that's pretty narrow. Now, interestingly, there have been numerous blockbuster drug products and biologic products that received orphan drug designation for a very narrow indication for, a rare disease, and went on to become a massive blockbuster drug because it was used off-label for another type of clinical condition. So there's some criticism of this program, but I think companies have found it very, very useful. In terms of the benefits it confers, you get 7 years of market exclusivity here in the US if you get the designation. There are federal tax credits you would get for qualified clinical testing expenses, waiver of FDA user fees for your marketing applications, and the ability to apply for grants to support your clinical studies. It's, obviously it's not a guarantee of any sort of ultimate approval. There are many orphan drug designations that have, we've seen it where they get the designation and they, have yet to get approved. But once again, there's a tremendous marketing cachet. So if you're able to get it and then, but you don't have the funds to carry, a marketing submission all the way through to pre-market authorization, um, companies, investors are very, very interested in companies that obtain this. Um, in terms of intersection with other programs, you can combine this with other expedited programs when the criteria are met. You request orphan drug designation at any time before you submit your marketing application or during development, and there is no fee for a request. This will just give you an idea of application review timelines. So this is a 2-year period, December 22 through December 2024. And you can see how many requests were received, how many were completed, and how many ultimately resulted in the designation. So it's like if you take a look at March 2024, there were 51 applications that were received and 38 were granted. I mean, this is, I think, very encouraging. Of course, December 2024 was not so good, nor was July 24, but it's certainly worth pursuing this incentive program if you will meet the, statutory criteria. This is for a new chemical entity exclusivity. If you are a new active moiety, you can get 5 years of market exclusivity from the time of your, approval, which is very obviously very, very appealing to companies. Here's just some information about, new drug product exclusivity that you might find helpful because we are going to make this slide deck available to everybody. This is the fast track program that I have referenced before, and it's similar to the other programs in the sense that the idea is to basically, facilitate the development of drugs and to expedite the review of them, provided that they treat a serious or life-threatening condition and they address an unmet medical need. And FDA, there's discussion about what that term really means. No therapy exists, or your product offers advantages over available therapies, superior effectiveness on outcomes, improved safety, adherence may lead to a better outcome. You improve improving diagnoses, or addressing an emerging public health need. So it's quite broad, and it's something that obviously should also be considered. The benefits are similar to what we've seen in some of the other programs: senior management input, more frequent meetings, written feedback throughout the development, the rolling review opportunity, so you don't have to have everything, the whole application completed before you submit it. FDA can review it in completed sections. And there's potential eligibility for both priority review and accelerated approval. Of course, if trials ultimately show that your innovation no longer meets the criteria for the program, your designation can get rescinded. So some more information about Fast Track. I'm going to actually skip this particular program because this is not very popular, and I don't think I perused the list of who was attending today's session. This really has to do with products that are intended to treat, they're in the antifungal or antibacterial arena, and you do get 5 years of market exclusivity if you are able to qualify your particular antibacterial or antifungal drug product. And this is really all about the genesis of this program was relating to the concern of the advent of superbugs. That is the end of the slide presentation. and I'm available. I know it's 12:02 and we went 2 minutes over, but since I started late, I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions for a few moments, if anybody has.
Thank you very much, Georgia. I think that was a highly intense but very informative session, and thank you for agreeing for us to share your slides post-event because I think there's lots of notes to go back to for people to think about. Um, I guess one of my questions, if I could ask one in turn, there seems a real drive behind all of this and what's going on with the administration about sort of accelerating or increasing the speed of bringing innovation and things to big unmet need. There's then the driver to bring stuff on shore, and there's the driver with the most favored nation to reduce cost. And I just wonder your take on how we've seen some of the deals now about the MFN announced and what's going on there. Is there a sort of an interplay between these things in terms of if you're prioritized on one of the programs, does that put you in a better position to go and negotiate with the administration?
I think so. I think so. Some of these programs, I think for sure with respect to the newest of the programs, which is the Commissioner's National
Mm,
Priority Voucher, very long name,
mm,
voucher program. I think that certainly would put you in a good position to do that. Some of the older programs, perhaps less so. But, as I mentioned during the
mm,
presentation, there has been this conflation of FDA now getting involved with drug pricing in a way that it never did. So that's why we're encouraging our clients to look very closely at these programs, particularly the most recent one, which is so broad. It really is. I mean,
mm,
it covers, many different kinds of products, and there's many different kinds of, not many, but at least five different national priorities as set forth by FDA and the administration. And if you meet any one of them, you can get this voucher, which would put you in a good
mm.
position in terms of, the pricing issues.
And certainly what I can remember reading about that new voucher coming through earlier, I'm sure I read somewhere, but you'll probably tell me I've just misremembered, which is also possible. But that was really targeted at it would be for US companies only. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case now that I've seen the ones announced. That have they broadened the reach of it or the
I don't
access?
think it's only for US
Mm.
companies. I don't think
Yeah, I might have
so.
misremembered
Uh,
that one, but yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
because I don't think that every company that just got the award is a US company. But
No, it's
that's
not. That's
something
what.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's something though that I'm happy to confirm, and I can send
Mm.
an email to you and can share with your members because I think that's a very important point for your membership.
Yeah, that's what I was just double checking really because I've somehow I thought I'd read that somewhere, but I could easily have
Yeah,
got confused.
I
Um,
think it might be too limiting if it
yeah.
were because there are so many drug and biologic companies overseas. I think it really what the key is that you demonstrate a commitment to helping
Mm.
address our U.S. national health priorities. Um,
Mm.
so, and that's
Mm.
really what that's getting to. But I will
Yeah.
confirm because I think that's an excellent question.
I think Lewis has put a question in the chat box. Lewis, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, you'd be more than welcome.
Sure. Hello. Thank you so much, Georgia, for the presentation. I was just wondering, especially for this new program where the review timelines are like cut down, like 80% or so, like up to 1 or 2
Yeah.
months. In your opinion, would you expect some kind of challenges meeting these very aggressive timelines from FDA in terms of resources, etc.? Especially if a lot of, as you were saying, a lot of programs start getting accepted into this incentive program? Thank you.
Well, Luis, that's a great question. And I have, I am aware that there is concern about that because obviously FDA is pulling reviewers to review these applications. But FDA is relying more for your, non designation reviews is relying more on AI to do the review work that kind of the lower level review team was doing before. Although there have been some challenges with their system. So I think that they are shifting a bit. I'm not particularly concerned that it's going to adversely impact review times for, marketing submissions that are not part of the program. I think I see a lot of movement coming from FDA, so I'm not particularly concerned.
Thanks, Georgia.
Thank
I mean,
you.
one of the things that occurred to me, it sort of relates to the resource issue within the FDA, and we read the headlines about 12% of staff have gone from one department and 12 or 13 from another. Um, I kind of get they are sort of speeding up and utilizing AI to do the lower level non-decision review bit. I kind of wonder though, for the smaller companies that were getting scientific meetings with the FDA previously, where they would get this advice early on and that interaction often through their regulatory advisor. The larger companies probably have a lot of that in-house and need it less. But for those smaller companies, that early stage advice, is there a danger because the experienced reviewers are being drawn into these aggressive timelines on other programs? It's going to be harder for some of the smaller companies to get that sort of scientific
Pay
advice type
attention.
meeting early. Yeah.
I think I think that FDA is so focused now on bringing innovation to market. I mean, I think reviewers that have historically been either too bureaucratic, stood in the way of, have been obstructionists.
Mm,
I think many of them have gotten sidelined and will continue to get sidelined. And I think this really gets down to the quality of the submission, the quality of the innovation. Um, if it's something that FDA thinks is, really is worthwhile, has clinical legs, so to speak,
mm,
they are going to devote the resources to it. But I think things that don't appear to be too promising may perhaps be collateral damage, maybe.
okay. Yeah. And I guess in that sense, 'cause I suppose with every change of administration and things are different, there becomes a kind of a I would call it almost like an allergic reaction to say, well, I don't want to work in this environment, therefore I will leave and do something else. Yeah, do we get over that curve and we'll see the staffing levels of FDA go up again, or is this a permanent shrinking of the overhead cost of running the FDA?
This could be a permanent shrinking, but that's not necessarily so bad for industry.
Mm,
It's
mm,
I've said it before when we've had our meetings, because sometimes the more cooks you have in the kitchen, the slower the food
mm,
is to come out. Because, I mean, we've worked on different um, products that were being reviewed by FDA, and we
mm,
saw whenever there was a change in reviewer, they would have a different opinion. It would set the clock back, new requests, and it was very inefficient. So the fewer, I mean, I shouldn't say the fewer reviewers, but
mm,
I think it was certainly time to approach, um, things a little bit differently. And so I don't think, as I said numerous times, I don't think things are going to be too slowed
mm,
down. I don't know if you're hearing from your
mm.
members that things are slowed down at all.
I can hear sort of anecdotally, I suppose, through the grapevine that people feel that things are slower, but then I guess over decades I've heard companies feel regulators are slow when in fact the regulators are doing what they're supposed to do and it takes time.
Yeah,
Um,
yes, it
but
takes time.
that's not comfortable if you're on the other end of that. I fully get it, and companies get frustrated, and I used to hear the same thing with grant reviews and so forth as well. You know, it's tough when you're the one waiting. Well, I'm conscious I'm dominated the Q&A here, but one thing does, Val, I need to ask you about. You touched upon the fact they're using AI. Is it the ELSA program? I think they rolled out in June or somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Are companies going to be using AI to write their applications? Because I have this vision where we're going to have machine talking to machine to decide whether a drug gets approved or not. And
I think that's very possible. Very possible. And I'm sure it's already happening now, in fact, at least for certain sections of the application, for sure.
I guess there must come a point where these systems kind of start being generative and learn from each other as they go through this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's
but,
exactly right.
I'm not quite sure where that ends up. I thought maybe I should stop my questions by now before we start getting into there's going to be no need for any of it after a while, which is
I was just going to say, I just want to emphasize one last time, and I've emphasized it before, which is what spawned today, is I encourage all of your members, if they're looking at the US market and their particular innovation does in fact need some kind of pre-market authorization, look closely at one of these programs because it can save you a lot of time and money.
I think that's very sound advice to wrap it up maybe there, Georgia. I think there are incentives out there and companies have to make the most of them, but now probably more than ever, I think, is when companies are being asked to do a lot more with a lot less dollars in those earlier stages particularly. So thank you for sharing all of the information and the insights and being so open to giving up your time to help inform us on this side of the pond. And I'll look forward to catching up soon, I hope. But thanks for everyone for tuning in. And thank you, Georgia, for your time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye for now.
Thank you so much.